Hello, my lovelies. I'm Ginny O, the author with no last name. And in May of last year, I proposed in my Lindsay Ellis style how not to make an MMO series. Star Stable Online as a game was in the beta development stage. It was in the real issue/problem part 5 of the series. And now that I've gone over some of the more fundamental parts of making video games on my channel, I want to delve into this a little more. So if you haven't watched my 8 types of video game players, the core game loop, or elements of a video game videos, you might want to do that. I won't be expounding on each of those things in this video like I did in those. Okay, harsh truth time. When hardcore video game players watch people play this game or play this game themselves, these are players of Pokemon, to World of Warcraft, to Elden Ring, I mean players who sit there and will talk about video games, they all say the same thing. Why are you complaining about a game in the beta state? These are players who know how, in general terms, their games are made and follow along with the different stages of game development. There are 3 of them: beta, alpha, and release ready. I did a 4th, excessive planning before the beta stage, but I might be alone in that. Dunno. Beta stages are the very early parts of the game where you're building map and coming up with systems and getting the coding done right. You're testing everything. Alpha stage games is when they open it up for testing near the end to the player base. Usually there's a bunch of quest work done. That is when they're opening it to players to find bugs and give feedback a year or so before release. And then release is the final product with potentially even more content than the alpha players saw and tested. For example, in beta, New World was an open world hardcore PvP MMO. Then they had a beta test phase, almost pre-alpha, and got told, no guys, this is not going to work. So in the last 9 months of development and before the alpha, they worked their butts off to change it to a more theme park, story-driven style MMO with faction PvP elements, and added a great deal of grind. They opened that up to alpha, somehow didn't fix all the bugs before released, and we got to watch it crash and burn. Fun times. To hardcore players of games, Star Stable is a beta stage game. A game still in the very early stages of development rather than a full release. And they think we're crazy to pay a subscription or a $60 to $80 fee to play it. And it's not because the story and map aren't finished, though that isn't helping matters. It's more like a combination of what makes a game versus something like a visual novel. Star Stable leans more to being a visual novel than it is a game. An uncompleted visual novel, no less. And I want to say Starshine Legacy, while they were written as visual novels, they had more gameplay mechanics than Star Stable Online. There are just things lacking in Star Stable that don't make it feel like a complete game package versus other live service games who, when they make updates, they put out entire game systems and new character options and large chunks of map and completed story arcs. They may call it a chapter or an expansion or a season pass. And in comparison, Star Stable doesn't have the foundation of a complete game to be able to expand upon and add things and take them away. I'm going to break this into 5 sections. The extended revamp of the graphics and bad coding, lack of mechanics, lack of a core game loop, lack of game elements, and lack of broad variety of play for different player types in an MMO system. So, extended revamp of graphics and bad coding. A big contributing factor to this beta development stage feeling is when you look at the game, there are in places 4 different art styles with characters and environmental assets going all the way back to Starshine Legacy. More characters than environment assets nowadays, but we still have 3 different art styles in the environment going on right now. One of the things game developers in the beta stage do is use placeholders for different assets in the game, especially if they are using engines they haven't made, like Unity or Unreal. They'll use assets they can buy in the store or get free to put into the environment so they can get the basic coding systems right in the game for any type of interactions the player has with the environment. They'll be working on lighting and how the player character reacts when it hits different types of hitboxes. Is there swimming? Is there riding? How is the character going to hit enemies? And how much damage is there going to be? How interesting is the crafting system? If you want to play a beta game in development and, pay for the privilege, go try out Dreamworld. It's a survival game. It's definitely in beta, and has more systems than SSO, weirdly enough. Actually, I don't actually recommend giving these Dreamworld guys your money, so maybe watch Callum Upton's videos about it instead. Once they have the systems figured out, which can take a couple years, during which they'll have their artists working on the art style and making the assets they really want to use, then they'll go in and start swapping out the placeholder assets for the finished assets. Illustrative example, Ashes of Creation. They were getting a lot of flack even 2 or 3 years into development for using assets out of the Unreal store. And now they're on the home stretch, and I don't think you can find a bought asset in the stuff they've shown us. Star Stable started out using mostly game assets from the seasonal games. They made a few new ones like Moorland and Fort Penta, and later Cape West and parts of Dino Valley. But they were really using a lot of the game assets and textures from the seasonal games, and they used the music and the lighting system and the clothes because it was the same engine. But for some weird reason I'm not still sure about, they threw out all the racing mechanics and character and horse stat control systems coding. When they started stripping out those assets in 2017 and creating a new graphic style that's more cartoonish than the old Star Stable seasonal realistic meets anime style, and then they didn't change out everything all at once, but did things piecemeal, the game went from being consistent-ish graphically and feeling like they were making a real headway in progress into the story, to being something slapped together by amateurs using 3 different types of low poly assets from the store, installed progression-wise as they have to go back and redo everything graphically on the map down to the horses. Now, they claim their engine can't handle taking out all the old graphics and replacing them at the same time. But their engine is 18 years old or so and needs to be replaced or seriously upgraded. It just makes the game look awful and gives the impression it's in the first 2 years of development, not 10 years out on quote-unquote full release, update every week or not. And the revamp areas keep getting smaller and smaller. It's cringy. Just get her done. I don't know why it's not driving them crazy as artists. It's driving me crazy. Beta games also have a lot of bugs, because that's the nature of beta games. And what Star Stable has right now is a lot of bugs. So being thrown up into the air and out of the map, that's fairly typical of a beta game. Falling through floors, losing the environment box, and bad clipping, and so on and so forth. Very typical to a beta game. The instability of Star Stable's code and total lack of optimization on the back end, as it won't run at 60 FPS, it makes it feel like this game, even 10 years in, is still in the very early phases of development. And that 60 FPS thing, yeah, hardcore gamers will come down on people hard on that. I've seen reviews of Cookie Clicker on Steam where they rag on him for not having 60 FPS. And I'm like, it's Cookie Clicker. I am only 50% sure that review was sarcastic. Anyways, Star Stable will not run smoothly on high-end gaming computers, and it's supposed to be able to run on a potato. And that's just the visuals and the bugs and the lag issues. Let's move into the gameplay itself. Lack of mechanics. Star Stable has a distinct lack of gameplay. It's infamously among the player base to be, go collect this, and go from point A to point B, whether it's a race or to talk to different characters. Catch animals. Clean something. To make matters worse, there were some types of minigames in the game like closing Pandora cracks and releasing energy from burnstones, and reportedly they've taken those out of the game because they thought they were too confusing. They replaced it with soul riding, which is run around like a chicken with your head cut off, basically. There's no combat, there's no real race mechanics, they've taken out an auto slowdown mechanic, and they've taken out the cold tolerance mechanic in Dino Valley. And if this game is meant to be a visual novel, then fine, you can get away with these fetch quests and basic racing that involves hitting space at the right time to jump and beating a clock. However, when they advertise this or talk about it like it's an MMORPG, then we have to ask ourselves, where is the gameplay? Or even when they talk about it as a horse game, where is the gameplay? Where's the different circles of choosable as profession types? Where are the factions? Where are the different racing systems for the horse sport types? If they want it to be an RPG or a horse game, it doesn't feel like an RPG or a horse game because one of the hallmarks of an RPG is player control over character and horse stats, along with control over their environment and things like player housing, or the ability to make effective changes on the environment of the game in, say, a sandbox RPG with building and crafting, and so on. The players of Star Stable have absolutely no control over their stats or their horse's stats when they level up. Your stats are your stats. It means you can't make yourself faster. You can't make yourself have better control over your horse. You can't jump better or turn tighter. Systems that were present in the Star Stable seasonal games. So the stat system as it is bad all around because if you are the same level with the same gear, you're going to have the same stats as every other player. There is no individuality or character classes or strategy, even by stat manipulation. MMORPGs are practically infamous for their armor tier stat systems. Star Stable has never put one of these into place. The armor tier stat system will have cosmetic sets that go from plain to super fancy, with low stats to high stats. In Star Stable, you can have the same armor set in 2 different colors, but one is high stats and one is low stats, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. If any of the cosmetic items have lower stats, and the prices don't correspond to colors or stats either. It's confusing and nonsensical. Having a tier system would be much easier than what they've done. The game has also never been properly balanced in money or in experience points. The game economy is in shambles. What very tiny economy they have. You have short, easy races that give more experience than the long, hard races. There's no easy, medium, or hard level of races explicitly created. Without different game system mechanics in place for different race types, if you mess up, it doesn't matter as long as you beat the clock. And the leaderboards are all based on time, so speed is the only stat anyone ever cares about. If you started the game later than, say, 2016, you are going to be able to hit over level 20, because players who played the game from 2016 previously had holidays, which gave them extra amounts of experience, so if they had been playing since 2011 and did everything they could be at level 23, almost 24. This creates a big gap of points levels in any PvP races, which aren't actually grouped very well by player level. A player level 20 is always going to lose to a level 23 if they are placed in the same group, and they're never going to be able to catch up to level 23 because by the time they do, level 23 is going to be 24, 25, or 26. There is no real level cap and no horizontal type of progression. It's hard to balance a game if the main story section of the game hasn't been completed, so a level cap hasn't been decided, and holidays should have never been giving player experience to begin with. Balance is something they start working on in earnest in the alpha stages of game development. Complete lack of balance and no ability or motivation to change it makes it feel like this is in still the early stages and shouldn't have been released. And for a game that talks so much about inclusivity and player accessibility, there is literally no way to change your keybinds or change the colors of the glows and race markers in the game to make this game easier to play or more comfortable for your playing styles. There's no voice acting for those who can't read or have vision impairments that make the text hard to read. You can't change the font size or move the dialog boxes, and every time they replace UI, it becomes even more basic and loses any charm it had, and at the same time, doesn't include things players have asked for or more accessibility options. It just makes the game feel unfinished, especially in 2022, where these accessibility options are getting to be standard in games. I can't even turn off my UI and have it remain off when interacting with items or people or races in the world. If you're wondering why we're going on slow, boring tours of Star Stable, this is it. If I touch anything, my UI pops back up. It's frustrating. Also, on a side note, when I scroll down in YouTube to choose the games in the games section of when I'm posting this video, Star Stable, unlike almost every other game that I have talked about, does not have a year release date after its name. So YouTube does not consider this game fully published, for one reason or another. Interesting note. Lack of a core game loop. Now, Star Stable doesn't really have a core game loop, and from a few comments I've seen from developers, I'm deeply worried they don't know what a core game loop is. One developer asked if the players wanted game mechanics or story, as if option C, both, wasn't available. Now, option C is 100% the right answer. We players want game mechanics and story, not one or the other. The core game loop is the actions the player takes to overcome challenges and obstacles to attain skills and abilities to complete a goal. I went over this in depth in my core game loop video. Star Stable is lacking two very big things: the advancement towards goals and the attaining of skills and abilities. Supposedly, we have this goal of defeating Garnock. There is a ceremony the Dark Riders want to do, and we are chasing after pieces of a book to find out when the ceremony is to take place and thwart it. We got this wand from Fripp, even though we shouldn't have according to him, because we're supposed to make it much, much later. This could blow up in our face. And we have a shard of the Light of Adine, and a flask of the Tears of Adine, and a vacuum for dark shadow beings, and all this is rotting in our closet with our borrowed binoculars and bus pass to Jorvik City, and magic pass to the circus. If you don't remember this, well, I don't blame you. We've been, cleaning a pigeon coop, and delivering milk, and gathering flowers for so long it doesn't seem extremely urgent. We have been stuck in the same corner of the map for 10 years straight. We haven't even gotten out of the Star Stable Autumn Riders section of Jorvik, much less headed north to Pine Hills and Rockville and northwards area that takes up about the same amount of area as the map we have now. We don't even know if the proposed map found and colored by SSO Theory Time, now Dark Siri, is even the final map. The story is not progressing in any fashion whatsoever. We are actually going backwards, since Concord is still a baby. But hey, that might change because Anne is just that impatient, and well, there will probably be some fridge horror consequences, like with the Jorvik wild horses. Thanks a lot, Cypher. And as we aren't completing anything to the goals, and we don't have any real game racing mechanics other than go fast, we aren't getting any skills or abilities to bind to keys or to minigames. We can't open portals to Pandoria. We can't see into the past or have visions of the future or look past illusions. We can't heal anything or make anybody sick, and we can't set up wards or do soul strike. We can't do dressage moves, we can't drift or turn on a dime or skid down hills. Without mechanics, without abilities and skills we unlock through story, without obstacles of increasing challenge to use those skills and abilities to overcome, the game is quite literally not a game, as we are missing the end part of the loop to make it a loop. We aren't even at a C shape at this point. And without advancing the story, it isn't even a visual novel. Honestly, I feel spoiled by playing old school games on the PS2, but maybe we should have known this was coming when none of the seasonal games had a finished story either. But at least we had control of our player stats, and there were different game racing mechanics, and the horses of different abilities. Starshine Legacy was complete, but Starshine Legacy was made by a different team. Lack of game elements. Now, there are 6 elements to a video game, 5 of which are talked about a lot in game circles, and a 6th I've added because it needs to be talked about. Narrative storytelling, socialization, cooperation, competition, violence, and challenge. So I did a video on these just last week. It was pretty short for me. If you want to know about it, then check it out. Star Stable has either extremely undeveloped or half-finished, doesn't have at all, these video game elements. And being they claim they are an MMORPG when they talk about their game, outside of possibly violence, they need all of them. And if we're going up against the Dark Riders and Karnak, unless we're really clever, and I don't see the team being that clever given that Dr. Jekyll / Mr. Hyde, that was Mr. Anwar, we're going to have to use violence at some point. Star Stable's story doesn't feel fleshed out. It's underdeveloped and half-baked. No one seems to have a timeline or a lore book or an outline, and there has been instances of retconning already. The new books are already not canon compliant with the new Dark Rider designs, and the characters can't remain consistent even in their dialogue from update to update. It's clearly a first draft, hasn't been edited, and the main character is constantly being shoved to the side of the story because, hey, we don't have skills or abilities to be the main character and make an influence on the story. And the villains feel silly, not scary. You know, they're supposedly gutting balloons and littering? Or Mr. Sands going, okay, take backsies, you can have Justin, I won't stop you. Or Darko being, well, Darko. Or Mrs. Drake being rather vain and selfish and completely unself-aware. Or Mr. Kemble, and property laws don't work that way. I can't take any of these villains seriously because they either end up helping us or are twirling their mustaches, monologuing, or engaging in childish vandalism. Over and over and over again. The only time people get caught is when they put themselves in dumb situations and we have to get them back out of it. I'm looking at you, Herman. Then the races and gameplay we do have with them feels frustrating instead of challenging. Races like Zappos and the new race during the the Witch storyline don't feel like they've been tested enough or given enough thought for the actual physical limits of the gameplay. It's frustrating when you get to an important part of the plot and you sit there for 10 minutes as your horse flies around not under your control, or you have to watch a boxing match. It's frustrating when you feel the story is building towards something big, and then when you get there, some type of Deus Ex Machina steps out of the woodwork, and you, the player, get told something instead of doing it yourself, or instead of breaking someone out and rescuing people, it's just a race away with a lot of invisible hitboxes left behind later because of bad coding. It's not fun. Challenge should be fun. It should test our skills of the game and not make us feel like it was just luck that we made it through the racetrack. The race out of the oil rig the first time was challenging. Zappos, unless you use E, and sometimes not even then does it work, is frustrating. As players, we want to be doing things, not having other characters leap to conclusions and telling us what is going on. We want to find out things for ourselves. That's why we play a game. The actual rescue of Justin from inside the Druid house, not the story leading up to it, challenging. The sneaking into Dark Core Base on Pier 13, more frustrating than challenging because we didn't get a Fog of War map even. If we got a Fog of War map, it would have been challenging, not frustrating. I actually liked the concept of it. I was just annoyed at the lack of map and resorted to go left the entire time. Also, a Fog of War map for Pandoria would make the area less frustrating too. I like maps. For an MMO game with a huge player base, there is a lack of good social systems. There are no group finders, not even a find a roleplay or find a club chat section, so everyone ends up spamming global. There are no group things to do outside of making your own fun, really. The chat system is half-baked, and they're constantly changing the II system that governs it is making everything worse in the chat, not better, as they don't have a real person moderation system to support it. There's nothing for people to do to cooperate together to create anything like gardens or towns or bridges. And you can't compete with anyone very well because the PvP system is unbalanced and the PvP players are bored out of the current racing system as it is. I mean, your eyes glaze over while racing anymore because you don't have to pay attention, and there's no way to compete even against an AI outside of very select races at Starshine Ranch, and those AIs aren't very good. So not only is there a lack of fair and balanced competition, there's a lack of skill required to even compete. And once again, there are no skills or abilities to do anything for defense or offense other than run away. We can't even do violence even if we wanted to. Everything we've done has been story specific, and we can't do it outside of the story, so there is literally no point to it. Can the game really be a game if there aren't any of the elements of a video game to it, or they're halfway completed? This is why it feels like a beta stage game to players of other games. They're just waiting for something important to happen, the player to be center stage, and to gain some type of skill or ability so they can do something, give us some agency and control. This is super unsatisfying. Lack of broad variety of play for different player types in an MMO system. There are a lot of different types of game players, and each of these game players have different things they want out of a game. An MMORPG, supposedly like Star Stable, in order to get the biggest audience possible, needs to have systems and mechanics in place to attract all the different types of game players. MMOs have created standard features over the years as shortcuts to what these different types of players want. The 8 player types I use are explorers, puzzlers, builders, griefers, loners, socializers, PvPers, and achievers. Now, you can combine these different things, 4 for mechanics and 4 for the more social side of gaming. You can be a lone explorer, or a social builder, or a PvP puzzler due to strategy and statistics. Now, again, I went over these in detail and what they meant in my 8 game player types videos. Check it out. But SSO is missing or not expanding on a decent schedule to keep these different types of players happy. The story and map is unfinished, which means there is less for explorers to do. There aren't factions or different character classes or branching dialogue story options, so again, explorers and puzzlers have less reasons to replay the game. And there is no building. Crafting is easy collection/complete recipe grind of picking up flowers or recyclables. The only foraging we've done has been in the story, and we apparently can't repeat it. Too bad. There's no repeatable mining, no farming, no timber cutting, no consequences for Pharaoh's lack of sustainable practices, and no housing. And no customization of any cosmetics, even in the crafting, to make the crafting feel remotely worthwhile. But hey, it does give a decent amount of shillings if you get the right 3 requests. A lack of stats and a lack of minigames means there's a lack of puzzle options. The only puzzling we've got right now is to puzzle out which order the quests go in, so we don't get stuck in places because we've been there before we should be. And that's SSO's fault, and a massive bug and glitch they need to fix, and not anything intentional. There's also the unintentional puzzle of how do I unlock opponent? Because while the quests to get it should be all called main quests, over half of them are labeled as side quests. Not good. There is again no challenge in the gameplay to keep people wanting to train their horses after a set number of times. You can't get good at this game outside of finding shortcuts and trying to avoid invisible hitboxes left over from who knows what, not the players, and not Star Stable. The PvP is boring and repetitive. There's no real way for club owners to create PvP within their club or with other clubs using systems in the game, thus adding to the lack of socialization issues. For a multiplayer game, quote-unquote, there's not really many multiplayer options, even if loners have plenty to do, including the story. There are so many loner options. People want to turn the multiplayer function off and not see anyone else in the game because the MMO portion of this game is really completely unnecessary and is only there to get investors interested. And even though we have a rather long list of achievements, they have no decent rewards and thus no incentive to actually do them other than to check a box on the list. Same for the leaderboards. The lack of good rewards means if you aren't an achiever, it doesn't mean much to you. And if you are collecting medals, those medals aren't getting you ahead story-wise, and you can get them with any fully trained horse because they're pretty much all the same. There's no point to it. It doesn't feel like anyone sat down and went, okay, we want to make an MMORPG, and MMORPGs have these features and attract these players, and how do we make our MMORPG attractive to both equestrians and girls without excluding boys completely? I mean, did no one go and play other equestrian games to see what they had? Alicia Online? The various My Life with Horses? Lucinda Green? Those French games? Anything? The conversation has changed a lot in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, making a girl game was a big deal. Now the conversation has changed that making a horse game directed at girls alone is enforcing bad stereotypes that horses are only for girls and aren't inclusive to boys. I'm not here to get into an argument over it or choose a side, I'm just pointing it out. If you don't have different types of play geared to different types of players, then the game feels like it's halfway missing features all other MMORPGs have. So instead of playing Star Stable, it'd be better to go play other MMORPGs, even if they have excessive violence and grindy combat. At least I can farm something, do some trading, paint the wall of my house. Or I can go play Calico again and not have violence and decorate my cafe and choose the colors and patterns of my outfits and play with my animals and be all by myself and not have to worry about everybody else. So, with the incomplete revamping of the style, the bugs, the lack of mechanics, core game loop, video game elements, and standard MMORPG features and horse game features pointed at different player types, the game doesn't even feel like it's a complete, playable state. It feels like they've been working on this 1 or 2 years and don't have 10 years worth of development into it. and revamping the holidays isn't helping because it's setting back development of the rest of the game. There isn't even a complete arc of the main goal of the story, which is to defeat Garnock. Now, I know I have mentioned a lot of this before, so I'm sorry for those who might find this repetitive. I also know, as my daddy says, it's much easier to point out a problem than to fix it. Of course, I was talking about how to paint on the house or the garage was peeling and not a video game. Here's the thing. SSE set out to create a video game, and even if the market is for girls or to be inclusive to reach out and grab boys and trans and NBs and all the other neurodivergent and disabled folks, then it behooves them to take some of the 44 million they've made in 2020 alone and drag their game out of the beta stage. Address the core game loop by advancing story and giving us some abilities and skills. And add in some mechanics, both racing and social, and the 101 other things the players want, including accessibility options, and get the graphics to one style, and squash as many bugs as possible to at least get the game into an alpha state, even if that means rewriting the code from scratch. This is literally their one job. And if they don't know how to do that after all this time, I'm not entirely sure what to tell you. I cannot tell, looking at the state of the game, what type of game the developers even want it to be. And big plans, ambitious roadmaps, without seeing those big plans or ambitious roadmaps, leaves me cynical they even exist. I know I've been going on about this for a year. In my emails, both of them are on my website. It's not like Star Stable can't get a hold of me. And I know, you may think, they don't care about you, they don't know who you are. I wish I believed that. What I'm trying to say, I guess, is Star Stable has had the option to reach out or hire people who have either been critical or work in the games industry and have developed games before. We aren't all underage minors, or they can compile the mountains of market research their fans are so willingly giving them with all these videos and posts on Insta and Tumblr and Reddit and in their Discords. Because it's clear to me, if not to them, the players of this game don't want a game in the beta development stage. They want a game that's challenging and fun in one art style, without bugs. Star Stable has become like this joke, even among its own community. Oh, there are Void Sheep. All hail Void Sheep. It's not even we feel entitled at this point. It's we want an actual game that addresses the elements of a video game and the needs of various players and makes us feel satisfied when we're done playing parts of the story instead of exasperated and vexed, and that the writers are so inexperienced if they think this is a good story. Inexperienced is not the word being bandied about in my Discord, but I'll be nice this time. This is what SSE said, what they set out to do, to create a good game for girls. I don't know what that means to them, but I know what it means to me, an adult woman. SSE isn't hitting good or game right now. They're going to have to at some point spend some money to address these issues instead of ignoring them for the toxic, positive, everything is fine as the game, such as it is, crashes and burns. So, if you do have a hardcore game player in your life, and the next time they say something like, I don't know why you're complaining about a game in the beta development stage, this is why. This is what they mean. In game development terms, Star Stable has never reached that full release phase. Even YouTube agrees with that. And I don't know if it ever will, given the very turtle state of development at SSE headquarters and the lack of willingness to address the deep issues or piss off the fanbase in hopes of getting some of the 97% of players who've already left to return. They want to hide their heads in that shell. Thanks for listening. Maybe this helped you understand the very deep problems with SSO game development-wise. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe. Bless, and I'll see you in the next video.